Hi friends, hope you are doing well. I'm Dr. Ganguly. Welcome to my channel. So today I'm going to discuss the fact that why PhDs seem to be very strong people, and very often I have discussed this with people. They are amazed that PhDs are people who continue to work on and on. This is of course after they have finished their PhDs, they are working in some place, and even some of them when they are working by themselves, they may even have changed their profession. But these people seem to be very strong. They continue on a problem or on a path when many people would give up. So this is a characteristic which actually comes about because of 8 different points which I'm going to discuss with you today. These are of course harsh points or realities about the life of a PhD student, and while when you are going through this process you may be very perturbed, you may be disappointed, you may be even sad. At the end of this process you will become very strong, because do remember there is a particular statement that harsh winds and cold winters do good timber make. This is, I think, by Robert Frost. So let's begin with point number one, and that is obstacles. Now, one of the things you will encounter when you want to do a PhD is that not many people actually support your decision to do a PhD. So many a time your parents, your family, your teachers, even your supervisor will not actively support your aim to do a PhD. Because do remember, what is happening here is that you are trading time and money for something which is very distant, and what you may be trading it for is actually fame and power. And whenever you try to do that, many people get very perturbed. Now, why would your supervisor be perturbed? One of the reasons is that many PhD supervisors are very careful about giving the PhD degree. They do not mind giving a bachelor's degree, giving a master's degree. These degrees are actually given by the university. The PhD is of course also given by the university, but the name of the advisor is going to be linked with you for the rest of your life. So very often if the student doesn't turn out well, somebody is going to say Professor so and so students are all very bad. So this is not something which people want to do. So actually you are going to encounter severe obstacles in your pursuit of the PhD, and this is going to be there right at the admission interview stage, when you're going to be grilled with a lot of questions, math questions, questions on the domain, and so on. Also, you are going to be subject to a lot of difficult coursework, qualifying exams, comprehensive exams, and once you have cleared all these obstacles, then only you are going to be able to do your PhD. Finally, when you finish your PhD research, you are also going to be grilled in a very thorough PhD defense examination. So that's the point when you actually get the PhD. Now, the number two point has to do with dedication. And one of the things which your PhD degree requires is that you are enormously dedicated to your work. And so you should be somebody who is not only present in the lab most of the time, but actually is actively working. So it's not like working in some companies where you may be sitting in front of the computer and looking at things, and after some time you will get your salary. In a PhD, you actually have to produce some quantitative result in the form of journal papers or a thesis to actually get your degree. So one of the things which is very important in some terms of dedication is focus on work and time management. Time management becomes very important because there are so many things to do, so many papers to read, so many problems to solve, and you have limited time. So you need to be somebody who manages his or her time very well. You don't have an active boss like people have in the company, so you will learn the art of managing your time by yourself. This is again something PhD students have to figure out how to do. Now, the number three point is about hard work, and many a time people who work in companies, they work in 9 to 5. Sometimes they say that they work more, but you will see that a lot of time they actually spent in various meetings, in various Zoom meetings, in making PowerPoint presentations, and so on. It's not sure as to how much time they actually spent in doing real work. So when you are a PhD student, this is not going to be the case. You are going to have to work literally all the time. So you may have to work an enormous amount of time, and you may also have to work when you are in your room, in the dorm, in your apartment, or even when you are sitting somewhere, maybe having lunch or dinner, you may be actually thinking about your problem. So what happens is that the PhD problem is so intense that a good PhD student will be thinking about that problem all the time. Now, this is something which is going to stick with you for the rest of your life. So what's going to happen is that whenever you have problems, whenever you have things going on in your work or in your personal life, you are going to be thinking about these problems all the time. Now, the fourth issue has to do with disappointment. And when you enter the PhD program, you are going to be repeatedly subject to disappointments, and these are in the form of various examination results, in the form of the comments you are going to get from your PhD supervisor. Also, if you submit any paper for review, whether it's to a journal or even an abstract to a conference, you are going to receive various harsh comments. So this negative feedback is going to make you very strong, and after some time what's going to happen is that when you get negative feedback, it's actually not going to have any impact on you, and you are actually going to be surprised if you ever receive any positive feedback from anybody. So this is again something which is going to strengthen you very much. You are going to be totally non-susceptible to any kind of problems because of negative feedback. Now, the fifth issue has to do with discipline. So, what's going to happen is that if you are a successful PhD student, you are going to cultivate a lot of discipline. You are going to have to wake up at a certain time every day, go to the lab, maybe even on Saturdays and Sundays. And you are also going to be somebody who manages to reach the lab before maybe your supervisor does, leave the lab after your supervisor does. This is certainly something which is necessary in many situations if you want your PhD advisor to have a good opinion of you, because remember, the advisor was a PhD student once and he was possibly following this algorithm. At least when I was a PhD student, this was pretty much the norm. It was expected that you are in the office before your guide and you leave the office after your guide. So this is something they watch out for. Now, this kind of discipline not only is related to time but also related to the various things you do, the various equipments in the lab you maintain, the records you keep as far as any experiments are concerned, the level of discipline you bring to your mathematical modeling, to coding, to developing various theories, statistical analysis, and so on. So certainly you have to be extremely disciplined. There are so many things you need to learn during the process of PhD. For example, LaTeX, for example, MATLAB, and various software. And all these are simply a part of the game. Now, point number six has to do with sacrifice. And like I mentioned before, PhD essentially involves sacrificing money and time for fame and power. And this is something you may not realize at that time, but later in life, you're going to realize this, that money and time are very precious commodities. And when you sacrifice it for fame and power, it becomes necessary that you make the best of this PhD degree. So you will see that many PhDs are very motivated toward the later part of their life. They try to get more interesting jobs. They try to work on important problems. They try to publish papers such that they are cited a lot. They want to increase their H index. And one of the things a PhD is able to do, which normal people are not able to do, is that they are able to leave their mark and their legacy by publishing various papers out there. So when you are older, maybe your grandchildren are going to figure out still that your papers are hiding there somewhere in Google Scholar or in some library around the world. So once you are a PhD and a researcher, you will leave your mark on the field very clearly. Now, the point number seven has to do with persistence, and persistence is very important in the PhD, because if you are not able to persist in your work for 3, 5, even more years, then your PhD is not going to come about. So you can think of PhD more like a marathon rather than a 100-meter sprint. So what happens is that people who like to sprint, who like to move very fast, for example, many company people are like that, they are going to have problems in the PhD because the PhD just goes on and on. So I know people who have PhD who have done their PhD in 3 years, in 5 years, in 8 years, and even a case where a person took 14 years to do a PhD. But it's always possible to get this degree if you have persistence. Now, that's something which is very important. Finally, point number eight, which is a bonus point, is that PhD makes you an independent researcher, or I can say it's a process which makes you a lone ranger. And this is very important because later in life, what may happen is that you may have to get into a situation where you work alone. So if you are somebody who is launching your own company, who is launching a startup, who is launching some kind of activity on your own, you are always going to be somebody who can work on their own. So I know of people who have even retired from their work, and for example, they are now writing books and so on. So they know this art of working alone. They know that they can do something all the time. They have that particular knowledge out there, so they can convert any problem into a research problem, and then they can continue to work on that problem. So even if you at any point of time decide to launch a YouTube channel, a coaching center, or any such thing, you will be able to persist on it for a long time and fructify that particular result, because you are somebody who can work every day, who has self discipline, who knows how to plan things, and who is not going to give up in a simple manner. So whenever you are going for a marathon, PhD is the best training you can hope for. What I mean is a marathon in the real sense of the life, not in the actual playground, which is done by most people. So I hope this video is helpful to you and you will understand more about the problems you are going to face during the PhD process and how many of these problems are actually going to make you a better person, a stoic person, and a very resilient person as far as real life is concerned.